Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel BNB Daily Spoiler. This is pure evil. RJ and Dylan plot targets Electra and Will.
Will says, she can stay here and won't allow Dylan to leave Los Angeles. Spoilers for the bold and the beautiful suggest that RJ Forrester and Dylan might intend to break up with Spencer and Electra Forrester. Will RJ and Dylan make new cunning alliances? During the week of February 2nd to 6th, Dylan will meet RJ for the first time, and they will click right away. Whether that friendship will be platonic or romantic, with some mischief involved, is the question. There is a reason why RJ fell in love with Electra right away. We know RJ and Will become more formidable opponents in the upcoming months, so it's difficult to think the program will give up on that viewpoint. Dylan and Will have also established a sincere bond. Fans of B&B Saw will cry genuine tears and open up to Dylan, so the show must be going somewhere with that. But Electra, who has been worried about Dylan spending time alone with Will, and Ivy Forrester are undoubtedly a problem. What happens if Dylan and RJ decide to work together? This could develop into a fun storyline if Dylan and RJ find they can support one another. To appease Ivy and Electra, RJ and Dylan may even arrange a date. Electra and Ivy may be able to unwind at last if Dylan finds a boyfriend. Convincing Ivy and Electra to lower their guard would be a cunning move, but it's possible that Dylan and RJ are secretly trying to sabotage Will's obsession with Electra. Dylan might be convinced by RJ that Electra is the better woman for Will, and he is the better man for her. Even if Will and Electra don't get it yet, RJ might insist that they are helping them. While they figure out how to put Will and Electra apart, Dylan and RJ might put on a show of affection for everyone else. Naturally, if RJ and Dylan find out they really have feelings for one another right when their plan is beginning to work, things could get complicated. In any event, spoilers for the bold and the beautiful indicate that Dylan and RJ will soon meet. So keep checking back for more details on what this means for Electra and Will. Dylan had never been the kind of woman to compromise. She had neatly folded habits, lived in lines and plans, and made decisions based on schedules and margins. Making a clean getaway was the only way she knew how to respond when Los Angeles turned into a rumor mill around her. Get out of the city. Go back to the anonymity that once protected her. Start over without anyone knowing how she makes decisions or how softly she laughs. For a woman who preferred strategy over drama, her list included modest apartments that she would research online, a laundromat in Santa Barbara that she adored, and a friend who had promised a sofa. At 3 a.m, when speaking the truth feels more like a confession than a yell, Will found her. She had efficiently packed her suitcase. 2 dresses, a pile of sketchbooks, a small canvas bag of toiletries, and tucked underneath the garments, the tiny blinking center of her present existence, the positive pregnancy test that she had kept hidden from the public. She had decided, with a sort of personal brutality, to keep this a secret for as long as possible, so anyone who wished to read scandal in this city would have to wait. Her motivations were straightforward and devastating. She feared being reduced to a headline and nothing more. She feared what the media would do to an unborn child. She was terrified of losing the position for which she had put in so much effort. With the decency of someone who has already discovered that life does not offer simple scripts, Will watched her pack. He had entered with the expectation of coffee and conversation, but instead he found himself in a silence that suggested something different. They circled one another like 2 ships traveling through fog for a long minute, neither of them anticipating entering the harbor. At last he muttered, "You really mean it," as the weight on his chest overcame civility. Dylan stopped to look at him. Her face was solemn, something Will rarely saw, and the room was only illuminated by the halo of one lamp. Dylan and he had first met in the studio during the busy, creative after-hours when drafts were destroyed and new versions were made. He had learned, in subtle ways, that she skillfully hid dangers because they were essential, much like a craftsman hides sharp tools. "Yes," she replied. "I can move, I can start over, and I can make sure we are safe. I don't want our child to be the focus of someone else's headline. I don't want our first photos to become commodities." As Will absorbed the succinct statement, A wire-like sensation twisted in his chest. Even though he was young, the reality of that situation, how one woman's choice to flee could change someone's life, felt more mature than they both did. He had witnessed Los Angeles devour people and then spit them out. He had also learned to treasure small, delicate things like loyalty, like rare flowers. "You're not running alone," he said. The words were tougher than a guarantee, but softer than a wager. Like stakes in a field, they fell. Dylan's shoulders straightened. "You're picturing a heroic life for me, Will. It is not heroic to leave. It's secure. And safety is the most important thing right now. Do you believe that I want to protect you from me?" They both looked up as his voice broke. He had been quick to become angry and quick to flee, but he had gradually come to understand the perils of passionate defenses. This was distinct, a stubbornness that stemmed from attachment rather than ego. "Do you really think I wouldn't go to great lengths to keep you and that child safe?" Dylan gave a brief, sardonic laugh. "It's about keeping my kid from becoming a business card. Well, not about you being a hero. Are you running away from the world or the people in it?" he asked, stepping closer and grabbing the luggage from her, as if he had a right to it just by touching it. "I don't want to be the cause of your departure if it's the second half, when your life turns into someone else's project. However, I will help you if it's the first, if you think you could do better somewhere else. I'll pack. I'll accompany you." He hadn't meant to make her cry. All he wanted was for her to sense the unyielding gravity of the man she had come to trust, and she looked at him in a way that made his ribs feel as soft as paper. "No," she said, but it was more of a hint than a response. "Well, you don't realize what this causes to people," she said. "I'm not even sure if I'm prepared to become a parent. I'm not even sure if raising one here is something I want to do. There are consequences to this. RJ is there, and the household, the Forster device. The baby will be at the center like a prize as everything spins out." Will felt his breath leave him for a moment as the name hung in the air like a chandelier about to fall. He had heard the whispers in the margins, the thin lines that threatened to make news. He didn't want Dylan to deal with any more issues, but the last thing he wanted was for her to run away because of the fear someone else had instilled in her. "So you leave," Will said firmly, "and let them take what they always do, your story, your future, your dignity. You're afraid your child will be taken away from you, so you want to go. Because no, Dylan, if that's the choice. No, she can stay here." She gave him a look as though he had said something both enraged and forgiving. What? He could see that she was trying to make peace between the man in front of her who had made the most sensible decision to be there and the person who had once been a stranger among a rooftop crowd. "I said I would not allow you to leave to hide. Not because I'm possessive or macho, but because running away is a kind of surrender that I refuse to accept. You are not a prize to be stored away. You're a person, and our child." He paused, then continued quietly. "At least one person who will endure the storm for our child is what she deserves." A soft sound filled the room, an intake that was a recalculation as well as a breath. For a brief moment, Dylan sat on the edge of the bed and let herself be small. She had never before shown vulnerability without acting it out. "You'll fight that," she said. "You'll need to pick a side between Liam, Forresters, and tabloids." Will's jaw tightened, giving the impression that he was older than he actually was. "If it comes down to being a good man or being placated by convenience, I'll always choose to be a good man." Will knew the shape of fidelity, but he had not yet mastered the delicate, bitter geometry of compromise. "I'll be the one who buys formula, cleans bottles, and offers to answer the phone at midnight. I'll watch the kids. I'll engage in all the messy activities that show my presence. However, I won't let you leave this place believing that you must be anything but free." Dylan didn't say anything for a long time, and Will was worried that she would get up and leave anyhow, giving in to her fear of being seen in public. Then she did something small and purposeful. She put the suitcase down and curled around the folded sketchbooks, as if they were fragile items she had to keep safe. "What happens if I accept?" Her voice trembled as she asked. "What if I let you help?" Will exhaled as though he had been freed from a momentary fear. "Next, we work together on it. But not because you're incapable of managing it on your own. Because I want to." Days rebuilt themselves through long, tense conversations and the small, painful acts of daily self-proving, just like soap operas do. The city defied them in public, but obeyed them in private despite its ravenous appetite for spectacle. Dylan agreed to stay, but she set boundaries like a woman entering into an agreement with a mindless, hungry world. Not on social media. Until they made their next move, there was no interaction with gossip columns. Until they were in charge of their story, they would not make any public appearances. Will concurs. Additionally, he set his own guidelines. They would reveal the truth to a small group of people who cared, those who would defend and refrain from using loyalty as a bargaining chip. Liam first. The conversation with his father was the kind of slow, methodical revelation that feels like pulling teeth before offering the truth as a gift. Will had long understood that being honest with Liam was both a risk and the only way to win back his trust in the future. With a firm grip on his father's wrist, he declared, "You can't control Dylan, but you may be a supporter if you want to." Liam's face wavered between acceptance and calculation. He had a complicated past filled with choices and obligations, but he had also experienced intense love in his own unique way. "I will help if she needs medical attention. Call me if she needs privacy. But Will," he said, pausing before becoming more pragmatic, "do not make her a headline. Let her be." Because women who had witnessed more dramatic events in the Forster sphere knew how to save a life, they also told Hope and Steffi in private. Hope showed up like a messenger with words and sandwiches. "You didn't run," she remarked after Dylan described the tactic. As she dealt with her own problems in the Forster world, Steffi offered Dylan a silent, passionate support that made him wonder how long it had been since strangers meant so much. "Good. Running is for retrieving lost items. You're not lost. However, Los Angeles is a city with sensitive wires and ears. Blood was found by the tabloids. Pictures of RJ and Dylan leaving a dining establishment. When innocent objects were caught at the incorrect angle, they ended up in feeds that acted like ravenous animals. Efficient and frequently uncaring, the Forster machine turned its gears. Convenience, ambition, and transactions to placate a dynasty were whispered. In the hands of strangers, Dylan's face, which had previously been created in her own mind, started to come back together. Will experienced the pressure as though it were physical. He observed as doctors provided covert treatments, a public relations manager took calls, and reporters started to gather. He answered questions from the media as well as well-intentioned people who were worried about Dylan's privacy. He quickly realized how draining protective labor could be, making small calls at odd hours, setting up additional door locks, and having a friend from the area stay with her while she slept. When a paparazzi showed up at the studio door with a camera and a scalpel-like grin, it was the first public altercation. Acting on an impulse older than both of them, Will felt himself shifting between Dylan and the camera. Adrenaline, which tasted like a mixture of fear and bravery, made his face flush. You don't want to give the spectacle what it needs, so at first he remained silent. However, Will did what men in their 20s sometimes do. He raised his voice when the man persisted after one too many flashbulbs exploded like unstoppable pyrotechnics. "Enough," he said with a ringing voice. "She is not a show, so she might remain here. This is the end. She is having a baby," he said, evoking a sense of decency as the small but hungry crowd around him fell silent, as if witnessing a break in a familiar stage prop. For a split second, he saw the faces of the photographers. Not monsters, he thought, but guys carrying out a profession that had lost its humanity. Back off. Still, the photos ended up in the streams. While some pundits praised his protectiveness, others criticized his audacity. Dylan, who had been observing him through sunglasses, gave him a seemingly vow-like smile. He would be the one to respond to the pillow at 3 in the morning, but the cameras could do whatever they pleased. While others passed judgment, he would be the one to stand on the line. The fate of the tiny life in his arms would not be determined by spectacle. But the storm was far from over. A source, anonymous as rumors usually are, hinted at something cruel during a news conference organized by a tabloid that smelled of retaliation. Dylan had been attempting to use the pregnancy to gain access to the Forster family. The implication was cheap and offensive. will experience a heat that had nothing to do with the weather. He was put to the test by lies, just as loyalty is put to the test. Instead of making threats, he showed up at the tabloid's office with an uncompromising and direct demand for decency. There was a young editor who had grown cynical before walking for 12 years. After listening, he laughed. The father said, "Kid, this is the world you chose to live in." With a clarity that felt like a wound and his shirt stuck to his back, Will left their office. People would tell falsehoods. Where there were no motives, they would create them. However, his refusal to allow Dylan to leave had turned into a public narrative, and in public narratives, repercussions follow. Then came the moment that characterizes life in a soap opera, giving multiple people a choice instead of just one. Marketing an event at Forster Creations as a charity show gave the company an easy opportunity to reclaim its story. Dylan received an invitation that was deftly worded as a chance to showcase charitable endeavors, enabling the family to express their support without elevating her to celebrity status. Dylan was given the chance to ground her story in what she had produced. Her eye, design prowess, and stubborn, subdued poetry of craftsmanship. She saw it with the same fear and realistic resolution that one might look at an open wound. She could continue to be vulnerable to the fence riders outside, while accepting and being a public figure. Alternatively, she might give up and lead a more tranquil life, which the media would perceive as a sign of guilt. It was a world of life or death choices. Will watched her as though she were a man entrusted with guarding a delicate object. "Do whatever you want," he muttered, his hands shaking. "I will be there if you go, and I will also respect that if you don't." She decided to go, which had an impact on their futures. Not to be used, not to become the subject of someone else's narrative. She would go because she wanted to use her art as a vehicle for self-expression on her own terms. The audience nibbled on anticipation on the night of the performance. The cameras were placed at particular angles. Hushed tones were used to display Dylan's paintings, which were strangely violent and impossibly tender. They were respected for both their talent and, grudgingly, their enthusiasm. Like any devoted partner, Will stood in the wings, terrified, proud, and furious that anyone would try to condemn the woman who had made the decision to stay. A lunchroom editor or an old friend of Steffi's took the microphone at the conclusion of the show and asked Dylan, quietly but loudly, what it was like to begin a life surrounded by rumors. At first, she concentrated on Will. Then she looked out at the crowd. She stated, "I'm not perfect," in an honest and firm tone. "No one is." I wanted to flee because fear is a powerful argument, but fleeing felt like giving up control over my child's life. I decided to stay because being open and imperfect can be the most brave thing to do. When she said his name and the audience courteously applauded, Will felt something inside of him shatter and then mend. It was a license to be human in front of the world, not a vindication. They walked home together, quieter than when they had left, after the cheers, pictures, and whispered interviews. For a few short hours, Will and Dylan allowed themselves to be ordinary in the way of couples who have just discovered a new compact of intimacy. The city at night is a creature that forgets its cruelties between street lamps. The world constantly puts people's resolve to the test, so months would bring new challenges. Rumors would spread like wildfire, and stories would blossom. But the most significant choice had already been made. Dylan would stay in Los Angeles. Because she made the decision to stay, because Will refused to let fear control her fate, and because they had decided to live a private life while enduring the harsh, messy public world. Later on, someone would write in a headline, "And no, she can stay here," as though one comment could quell the storm. It was unable to. However, it was important. It changed the course of a woman's choice from one of covert withdrawal to one of assertiveness. It anchored promises in small acts of bravery rather than grandiose gestures, making them tangible in a way that soap operas frequently fail to do. Dylan squeezed Will's hand as they made their way back to their apartment, the city shimmering behind glass. "Thank you," she said simply because she asked, and he answered, not because she needed him to prove anything. Will gave her a kiss as though he had received a fresh map. "We'll do it together," he clarified. and I'll stand in front of anyone who tries to make you small again. With a gentle smile, she promised coffee mornings, small arguments, lullabies at midnight, and a life constructed in the heart of a bustling city. Outside, Los Angeles carried on with its rumors as patiently as a machine. Dylan stayed inside, kept his promise. The remainder, the fallout, the conversations, the challenges, would mold them into the individuals they were meant to be. The choice had been made for the time being. No, uttered in a calm, courageous, and straightforward manner. She can stay here.